Welcome back to another episode of The Shepherd's Heart. Nah, let's just talk. Let's just, I want the audience to get to know you guys. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to hey, tell me this, tell me that, let's talk this, let's talk this. But one question, Humberto.
Yeah.
Which child do you love the most?
Boy, you really put a good one on too.
Now that I've thrown you for a loop.
Well, that's really an impossible question to answer, man. I don't think you can. Obviously, all of your children are a great manifestation of God's grace in our lives.
I know how many you have, but how many do you have?
I've got three kids. My eldest is a girl. Her name's Desiree. The second one is Jonathan. He's the boy. And the third one would be Shiloh. She's the youngest.
Didn't I see Desiree leading in worship here a few times?
Yeah, I've been very blessed that my children have followed us in what is ministry work. And again, this is something that has grown out of their hearts. We've never trained them or told them that they had to do that. It was their responsibility. This is our family obligation or nothing of that. We always wanted it to be a natural desire that God would birth in them. And so in my natural family, musicians, all of my family's musicians. My father's, all their brothers were musicians. His father was a musician, and their fathers, his brothers were musicians. It's always passed down. So it passed down to my children, also to the generation of my brothers.
You're kind of a musician yourself, aren't you?
I played the guitar a little bit, but then I put it away because I wanted to be compassionate towards the people. No, I used to sing also at the church. I mean, when you start at the church, as we all know, you do everything, so you have to do everything.
I play iTunes. So you have three children. Do you mind telling us their ages?
Well, the eldest would be 26 years old, and they're about spaced 2 years apart.
You're also a granddaddy.
I am now a granddaddy twice, and that is a great blessing. I've been blessed with two great grandchildren. And it really is a wonderful change. It's something that comes into your life that is a great blessing.
You smile a lot, but when I see you with your grandbabies, man, you light up like a Christmas tree. It's a beautiful thing.
It is a fact that your grandchildren, seeing them is just something different than your children. You love your children. You enjoy your children, but there's something about your grandchildren. I think it's got to do maybe with they're the future. You're looking at the promise of God. I don't know, something that's very
special.
I
don't know what it is either, but it's kind of neat. You love your children more than anything, the Lord and your spouse accepted.
Right.
And then they have children.
Exactly.
So this is like more love, children's children. It's pretty cool.
And once you get into it, you want more. So my wife is always wanting to encourage
Give
them.
me some more
when are you getting married? We need more grandbabies.
So you've got 3 children, 2 grandbabies, and 1 wife.
Yes, indeed. 1 wife only, according to 1 Timothy 3, just 1 wife.
How long have you two been married?
We have been married 28 years this May the 28th.
My wife and I, 28 this December.
There we go.
Check us out. But you started kids before we did because our oldest is only 23.
Yeah.
You've got 3, I've got 4.
Right.
I've got 3 boys and 1 girl. Mottel.
That's me.
You've got children too, or child.
I've got 1 child.
And do you mind telling us a little bit about him?
Sure. My son Jacob is 21, about to be 22, and he is our one and only child. He is the only child of a middle-aged Jewish mother, and so,
One's enough, huh?
Books have been written about that, and that's as far as I'll go. But we've been married for 38 years, and so we're old veterans at this. But because my wife is a few months older than I am, I like to tell
Be careful now.
That she robbed the cradle. And she just rolls her eyes.
Where'd you meet your wife?
I met my wife in the context of a Messianic Jewish fellowship. The man who had led us both to faith in Yeshua also led a fellowship and had meetings. And so that's where we met in that context.
Do you mind telling us who this man is?
Oh, Vincent Morgan.
Oh, okay.
And in our biographies published by Ariel Ministries, we clearly say that. And Vincent has just been a wonderful part of our lives because he led us both to saving faith. He showed us Yeshua, Jesus, in the scriptures. And Deborah.
Now, he led you both to faith. Was this before you were married or after you were married?
Oh, before we were married. He led Deborah to faith when she was just 21. And then she was part of that fellowship Then I came in later on searching and came to faith soon thereafter, and we met after that point.
Now, did Vince also put you together as a couple?
He suggested it, so yes, he gets the credit.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
So, you know, matchmaker,
Right.
make me a match. And so Vincent was a full-service ministry to us.
Now, I met Vincent many years ago. We corresponded a bit. We met personally a few times. He's also a watchmaker.
He is, that's his avocation. He is a serious hobbyist,
Yeah.
but he's in full-time ministry. And interestingly enough, he is a Gentile believer. He's not Jewish. But when I first was on my search, I met this man who was, although not Jewish, he was able to speak Hebrew. He had lived in Israel for a long period of time, and I had never been to Israel. And he knew more about Jewish things than I did. And so he made me jealous
Right?
that I needed to find out about
It sounds
this.
somewhat biblical, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Never thought that passage that said about provoking people to jealousy had to do with Gentiles having a better knowledge of things Jewish than Jews.
Yeah.
But when it comes down to it, when a Gentile knows the Jewish Messiah and a Jew doesn't,
Yeah.
there should be some provocation in there somewhere.
And we really were. I could see in him that he had a relationship with God that I did not have. And so it was intriguing. I saw young Jewish people about my own age all believing in Yeshua, Jesus. That was a very potent time during the late 1970s for young Jewish people coming to faith in Messiah in New York City. There were all kinds of movements, various types of movements of this happening, and the Lord just used all of that to impress upon me that putting my faith in Yeshua as Messiah was not a traitorous act to my people, but rather it was embracing that which God had promised.
Was Deborah raised in a Jewish home also?
Deborah's background is very interesting. People need to understand that among Jewish people, there were two different groups that geographically separated and went in different directions. Yeah. My group of Jews were the Ashkenaz Jews. The Ashkenaz Jews left the Middle East around the year 700 to 800 AD, went up into Central Europe, and were received and settled well, and grew and prospered in both Central and Eastern Europe, with the result that all four of my grandparents were born into traditional Orthodox Jewish homes in the Eastern Europe, in the Ukraine, in Belarus, in Poland, in the 1890s. So that's one strain of folk.
And by the way, that's where my people come from too.
And that's the same thing. Most American Jews trace their lineage back there. However, there's a second strain who were in the Middle East for a little bit longer, but ultimately took the opportunity to go to Spain when that presented itself. And at some point, my wife's ancestors, maybe around the year 800 to 900, in mass migrated over to Spain. They were there for about 500 years. It was called the, quote-unquote, the golden age of Spanish Jewry. Yeah. These things are very well documented in traditional histories. But because of the changing politics, Queen Isabella said, you Jews have to get out. She was under pressure from the Roman Catholic Church. And the famous year in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue.
1492, they got rid of the Jew.
And they also got rid of the Jews. And so by that year, that was the year that the Inquisition said all the Jews have to either convert at the point of a sword to Catholicism or leave the country. Many of them did leave. A bunch went down to South America, and some of them are still identifiable to this day. Yeah. But another group actually got in a boat and sailed back east, where they were well received in Turkey. Large numbers went to Turkey and remained intact. Among these were my wife's ancestors, who settled in the town that's known in the Bible as Smyrna, which today is known as Izmir. And in Izmir, Turkey, biblical Smyrna, for 400 or 500 years, there was a close-knit group of about 30 to 40,000 Jews who became merchants, They were business people. They were landowners. They established synagogues.
Now, by the way, 30 to 40,000 Jews, that's a lot of Jews.
Yes, yes.
In a community that might have had 100,000 people in it or something.
There were even more in Istanbul, just to the north. What's unique was that they retained their ancient language, which was medieval Castilian Spanish that they had picked up in Spain, but they wrote it out in Hebrew characters. So my wife's mother, born in the Bronx in New York City, her first language was actually Ladino.
You know, I've heard of Ladino, but I've never known anybody who's spoken it.
Yes. Yeah.
Or anybody who knew anybody who spoke it.
Yeah.
So this is a first for me.
That was her mother's native tongue, and she did not learn English until she went to the American public school. And so we are both Jewish, but from very different geographical areas. By the way, it's a different culture. There are different food items. Yeah. The Ladino Sephardic foods are very much more Mediterranean, whereas the Ashkenaz foods are from Eastern Europe, a lot of heavy grains and fats. And,
grains and grease.
and meat, yes. Yeah. It's a cardiologist's dream. Yeah. And, but, you know, there are all kinds of differences that we would kind of get a little tiffs about. Well, which food is better? What pronunciation of Hebrew is the correct way?
Right.
But, you know, ultimately, a wise husband simply says, yes,
dear. How about you? Where'd you meet your wife?
I met my wife in Dallas, Texas. I had gone to study, and she had graduated. That's where we met. We're going to a church there in Dallas, Texas. It was a Spanish-speaking church. And actually, she was serving as an usher there at the church.
Now, you're originally from Mexico.
I was originally born in Mexico.
Your wife also?
No, she was born here in the United States. She was born here in
Spanish was her first language?
In her household, yes.
Yeah, okay.
In her household, both of her parents speak Spanish. So that's where I met her. And it really, when I met her, it was really a response to prayer. I was thinking that I was needing a wife. The Lord was speaking to me, telling me it was not good for a man to be alone, especially when you don't have family or anybody near. And actually, as I began to pray, I spoke to my mother also. My mother's always been a good counselor. And so she was praying about that also. And actually, I believe that my wife is a response to that prayer, because I was asking God for that woman that I needed to partner with. And so I think that God really answered.
Tell me that's not the most romantic and spiritual story ever. I prayed for this woman, and this is the one God sent me. How cool is that?
Well, listen to the first time I went to dating with her. First of all, when I called her, she was very nervous because by then I was her Sunday school teacher.
Oh.
And so my wife is very, she likes to have a good time. So when she laughs amongst people, you can hear her, because she has that kind of laugh that attracts people. That attracted me also. But when I called her, she was nervous. She said, "What did I do? Did I get out of line? Why is he calling me?" You know? But then I called her with the good news that I wanted to spend some time. I wanted to get to know her, you know, in another way. And actually, the first time that we went out, I proposed to her marriage in a sense, because this is what I told her. And maybe this is very Jewish. I told her, I sat down, I told her, I explained to her what it is that I wanted. I was seeking a wife. I was seeking a serious relationship. And so I began to tell her, do you have any plans? What do you see about me? Because again,
She didn't turn tail and run right out of the coffee shop.
No, right there I told her. And I told her, this is what I see. I see this in you. And if we were not headed in that direction, we would not start anything. So again,
boy, you are all business, huh?
Yeah. I'm sorry, that's the truth.
Yeah.
So I sat down with her and I told her that's what we wanted. That is to say, the ultimate thing would be marriage. Again, any relationship.
Listen, I wasn't mocking.
Yeah.
More of us need to be this way.
Exactly.
We shouldn't be out there playing games.
We're just impressed. We're just, you know.
There's only one reason to date, and that's to look for a spouse.
And I did it at the Six Flags Mall there in Arlington, Texas. I sat down with her and I explained to her where I was, who I was, and what I was seeking. And again, I told her, I'm not promising that we're going to get married, but if we're not headed that direction, then there's no reason for us to have anything here. And so she accepted that proposal that I gave her. And about 6 months later, we were married.
What did she say? She said, like, yeah, that's what I'm looking for too, or?
No, nothing like that. I think that I don't know how shocked was. I never really have asked her, but she accepted the proposal that I gave her. I think she sensed that I was giving it with a sincere heart. I imagine she had seen me and she had seen who I was, and and I guess her heart was moved towards it. But that's exactly the first time that we went out. That's what it was.
So
about.
within 6 months, you proposed.
That was really the proposal, and about 6 months later, we actually married. So we were married pretty quickly after that.
Interesting. When I met my wife, we were engaged within 6 months too. So it must be the Holy Spirit working on it. How long did you know Deborah before you two got the bug?
We probably knew each other for about 1 year. We were actually involved in a Messianic singing group together and did a little bit of touring. We knew each other for about a year before I proposed to her, and then we were married around 5 months later.
He also sings and plays guitar.
Oh, really?
Yes, and also have recognized that others do it better than I do. And so I try to work in my talents. But, my wife was torn because at that point she had an opportunity to attend a Bible college. And we didn't know what to do. She didn't know what to do. But the Bible college was only about 2 hours north of New York City. And so she went off to Bible college, and all during that time we were corresponding and talking and seeing each other on the weekends, oftentimes in the context of ministry. So we'd go and we'd be in churches, and we would be singing and getting to know one another. And she said it so distracted her that she got the worst grades ever of her entire career in school because she was just thinking about the possibility of marriage.
And no doubt she's been taking you to school ever since.
That's right. And so she left the school after 1 year, and that was the beginning of my education.
Well, you met in the context of ministry. You met in the context of ministry. We met in the context of ministry. I guess it only makes sense, you know. My wife and I, we met at Moody Bible Institute, and you were your wife's Sunday school teacher.
Yeah.
I was my wife's, I don't know what to call it. I was leading teams of people in door-to-door and street evangelism.
Outreach.
And she was on my team.
Well,
So, interesting stories, this.
yeah.
Yes.
Your son, too young, no grandchildren yet.
No, he's not married. He is just 21 going on 22.
So, he's single. Is that what you're saying?
Where's the camera?
Right.
My son is single. He's a good-looking boy. He doesn't have a beard. He's nice short hair. He's. In fact, I've got a picture. Okay.
We can have him posted in even better later.
There is the family. So you can zoom in on this later, but there he is. And so just Google my name, and I'll forward all the emails to him.
You got to understand, this is hilarious on so many levels. Yeah. First of all, the Jewish parents trying to get their kid married.
Yes.
Secondly, his son is shy.
It's very shy.
Last thing he'll want is his dad putting his picture up in front of thousands and thousands of people asking for a wife for him.
Yes.
Exactly.
This will be the end of this father-son relationship as soon as he calls in and tells him what happened.
No, that's. I'm changing my number.
So,
Does your wife work outside the house?
We have purpose that we didn't want her to work, especially or particularly when the children were small. Mm-hmm. So always my wife has been with them, with the exception, I think she worked like maybe 6 months at a job that was part-time. But we really wanted somebody to be there always with them. I always had the conviction that I didn't want any stranger to raise my children. I wanted us to raise our own children. So she made that sacrifice, and it's something that came out of her own heart. And so we've always been blessed to be with our children from the time they were young.
And Mottel, what about Deborah?
She was in the house. She was mothering Jacob, and she worked occasionally in his later teen years. She developed a love for doing like this exercise dancing, so she found a position where she could work as the office manager, and did that for a while. But always on a very part-time basis. We've been blessed that our son was always wanted to be around the house. We never had to worry about him. He'd look at some of the way that other kids were misbehaving, and he would just shake his head and would say, "Why in the world are they doing that?" He has no interest in a lot of these ways that some of the kids act out. And so we've been blessed in that way. We never have to ask where he is. And so we are very blessed for that. And he's trying to find his way in the world now. He's about to graduate from college and perhaps to do film editing or an associated sort of field. But he has very strong talents in that. And we've tried to encourage him along those lines.
How'd you come up with the name Jacob?
Oh, my. The word Jacob is an alternative name for the people of Israel. Obviously, because Jacob, the patriarch, was the father of all 12 tribes. So as a result, throughout the Bible, Jacob is an alternative name, excuse me, for the people of Israel. Yeah. So we had that on one hand, plus the fact that my wife Deborah's grandfather, his name was Jacob. So we had these two factors.
It's a Jewish custom to name your children after deceased relatives, usually. Sometimes people will do it even after living relatives.
Yeah, the Sephardim do it after a living relative. But it just so happened that my wife's grandfather has passed on, but he is named both after my wife's grandfather and the general concept that this Jacob name is indicative of the Jewish people as a whole.
And how about you, your children's names? How did you come up with their names?
How I came up with their names. First of all, my son's name is Humberto Jonathan. I actually wanted it to be Jonathan Humberto. And so I told my wife that's kind of what I wanted, because I really didn't want him to be called Junior.
Right.
I never liked somebody called,
yeah.
I didn't like it personally. I didn't like it. So anyway, but then when it came for her to sign the paper, she put Humberto Jonathan. And so to me, I'm very honored, because a lot of people have known him as Jonathan, but in his job and in other places, his name is Humberto, and he uses that name. So it honors me a lot that he wants to use that name, because obviously Jonathan's a lot simpler to use. I always had problems with Humberto because it's not an English name.
You know, we had a similar situation. Our fourth child, Joseph, he was going to be Daniel. Up to the day of his birth, he was going to be Daniel. And then for some whatever reason, we had talked about Joseph, but on the day of his birth, somehow he just ended up being Joseph. You know, God, I think he helps name people.
That's right.
He's not only sovereign,
yeah,
but it's a biblical thing that God often names people.
That's very important in the things of God's got. I always tell that Hispanics, because Hispanics always got crazy names. Like, for example, there's Hispanics whose names are Dolores. What is Dolores? It means pains. So why you call somebody pains? So I always tell people, be careful about the name you give them. So it's very important. Humberto is a German name which means brilliant hun. So you put Jonathan with it, it means Jehovah has given a brilliant hun. So it gives honor to God in that way. My youngest daughter, her name is Shiloh Moriah. Shiloh is where the tabernacle was first, and then it was at Moriah.
That's cool.
Speaks of two glories. Desiree, of course, is a French name. So it means my desire. And her second name is Elizabeth. And so all of these names are names that we just felt to give them. And again, it's just a great blessing to see your children grow. I've been very blessed to have them with us in ministry, really involved. Both of my daughters went to prepare for ministry at Christ for the Nations in Dallas. And so they are really passionate about serving God, worshiping God. And so we are very blessed to have her.
And you and your family are at a church here in Midland, Odessa area?
Yes.
Odessa specifically?
Yes.
Tell everybody the name of your church and where it's located.
Well, the name of the church in Odessa is Iglesia del Camino, means Church of the Way. And so we are at 903 South County Road West here in Odessa, Texas, close to I-20. And so we've been ministering there since 1992 in September. My youngest daughter was about 3 months old when we moved here, so we barely born, and so she's been growing with the church as we've been growing.
And what's the church's website address?
It's the same. It's iglesiadelcamino.net.
Okay.
So it's the same as iglesiadelcamino.net.
And Mottel, you have a website that people could check out?
Yes. Messiah NJ. NJ as in New Jersey. That's where our work is centered. So simply messiahnj.org. And there you will find a lot of the videos that I've produced or been involved in, most notably the video that was done last year by One for Israel, where they were hoping to get 25,000 views after a year or two. And the thing, at this point, a year and a half down the road, has 8 million shares on Facebook.
That kind of blew somebody's expectations out of the water, didn't it?
It's astonishing what that video has done. And so messiahnj.org, there are hot links to all the videos. You can watch them right there on the website. There are some teaching articles. There's a lot of information about the Middle East. There's a lot of confusion today about the situation in the Middle East, Israel versus the Arabs, so forth and so on. And it's changing almost month by month. And so I've hot linked various articles and would encourage believers to take a look there. And there's also links to some of my DVD Bible teaching sets that I do through Ariel Ministries.
We also played Mottel's testimony on episode 1 of this season of The Shepherd's Heart. You can probably flip back on Roku and see that there as well. The ministry I'm involved with is in Tucson, Arizona, and 2 congregations, 2 websites. So we have one website I can direct you to, worshipmall.org. Worship Mall. The reason we don't sell anything. It's Worship Mall because on our campus we have the Messianic Synagogue, we have Book of Life Community Church, and I leave both of those. We have a Russian congregation that meets. We have an Indian fellowship that meets.
Wow.
And we even had a Chinese language group for a while that used to meet. So we have all these organizations coming together for worship. I just said Worship Mall, there we go.
Wow.
And so you can click on worshipmall.org and that'll open up a window that'll give you access to either Beth Sar, Shalom, or Book of Life. And of course, you can check out God's Learning Channel for some of my episodes, Rock, Shovels, and Manuscripts, here with The Shepherd's Heart, and also Walking with Messiah. This, though, this is The Shepherd's Heart, where we look at the hearts of the shepherds, and we talk about sometimes some controversial issues, sometimes some fun issues. This was just a kind of getting to know you session, so everybody can, you know, feel a little comfortable, grab a cup of coffee, sit down in the living room, have conversation with us, hopefully with their Bible open.
That's true. Yes, yes.
Please join us next time on The Shepherd's Heart and after break on The Shepherd's Heart. We'll see you soon. God bless.
GLC invites you to visit us on our Facebook page at facebook.com/GLCTV. Here you can stay in touch with all of the latest GLC news along with daily scriptural inspirations, current specials in our bookstore, links to our newest shows, and online media, plus articles from trusted sources. Feel free to drop us a message or a question by posting to our page. Please help us out and like our page by clicking on the thumbs up button. Don't delay, drop by the GLC Facebook page at facebook.com/GLCTV. We want to interact with you today.
Welcome back to the other half of The Shepherd's Heart. You notice I'm holding my camera here. I didn't realize I had the light on too. Sorry, that's probably messing you guys up. But I wanted everybody to see what I see, what we see. So this is what you usually see, but this is what we see. Say hi, Randall. That's Danny over there. And we don't see Ryan, but we hear Ryan. Ryan's in the back, and he gives all of his instructions, not by what you would think, microphone. He just yells. Not because he's angry. He's a nice guy. But it's the best way of communicating with us. So, okay, I'm going to turn this off now. This was fun. Thanks for letting me do it. Lighthearted.
Yes, very good.
I like to have fun. But we do have some things to talk about that aren't always necessarily so lighthearted. When Humberto and I were talking maybe 2 weeks ago, we were looking at some statistics involving pastors and ministry, and this one was pretty strong. Each year, 4,000 new churches are started and 7,000 churches close. So if we keep going at this pace, we're going to be out of churches in no time. Yeah. And then I brought this statistic up to Mottel a few nights ago, and he said, you know, church is closing. That's not necessarily a bad thing.
Right.
Such a contrarian.
Yes, on some things.
Yeah. So what were you thinking when you were saying that?
You know, I'm looking, when you had mentioned this, and before I came out here, I printed a couple of different surveys. And these are 2 different surveys than the one that you had. And here is the bottom line. You know, you have 3 surveys, you have 4 opinions.
Yeah.
And here's the evidence. So you almost have to pick your survey. What's the difference? Sometimes the surveys that are the gloomiest are reflecting the mainline Protestant churches, which are closing at a substantial rate,
Yeah.
which, in my view, send all of your angry email to Humberto, in my estimation, is a good thing. Because many of those churches long ago stopped preaching Messiah and stopped preaching the Scriptures.
So they're only churches in name. They're not like Bible-centered.
Right, and there are a good number that I have heard of, people I know who are familiar with churches that have maybe 12 to 15 people on a Sunday morning where the gospel has not been heard in years.
Yeah.
And so for churches like that to close, I don't think is a bad thing. I want our communities to see churches as vibrant places where people who are in love with Jesus the Messiah go to worship.
Yeah.
I don't want them to see it as a relic of a previous generation where only old folks go. And so I'm not overly concerned with churches that are closing, because in 9 times out of 10, there are probably good reasons to close. I'm excited about the churches that are opening because they have a fresh vision and they are starting with a clean slate. They're not saddled with some of the traditions that sometimes weigh you down, and they're able to go with the Spirit and to go with the Scriptures without being saddled with some church tradition that they have to keep up with.
Would you rather see 1, 2, 3 more churches grow or start within a close area, or one church get bigger?
You know, it all depends on the area, and I'm not trying to escape the question. I have, and this is something we discussed in another episode, one of the big controversies in American evangelical movement is do we do heterogeneous churches? That is, churches where you have all different types of people attending the church, or homogeneous churches. I can make a cogent argument for either side. I can sound convincing arguing for either one, because at various times I've been a member of one or the other. There have been years that I've been a member and be allowed to have been a member in 2 at the same time. One was my home church, and one was my messianic congregation on the field. One was a heterogeneous church, various cultures. One was a homogeneous church, which was basically Jewish people who are believers in Yeshua the Messiah, worshiping in a Jewish cultural context. And so sometimes certain needs in certain communities, certain groups within the community, will most likely have their needs met through the homogeneous church. Other times, there needs to be a heterogeneous church.
So there's not a simple answer. It's what the community needs.
And not only that, even you and I know Jewish people who are more comfortable in a Messianic Jewish congregation. On the other hand, you and I also know other Jewish believers who are perfectly at home in an evangelical church and are happy to be there and feel no loss of Jewishness just because they're there. It's not either or, it's, as we say in Hebrew, gam v'gam. It's both and both. There needs to be that opportunity. So I'm not pessimistic. I think believers need to recognize the times that we're in, where society in general has a hostility toward our faith. Increasingly, the federal government has a hostility toward biblical values. We've seen that particularly in the last 7 or 8 years or so. And as long as our eyes are open to those things, we recognize that God is going to preserve his body of believers.
Humberto, there's some things that make for a church to be strong and healthy.
Yeah.
And some things, not so much.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, one of the things is the starting point, or the beginning point, is very important. Whatever the foundation is, that is very important to whatever you're going to be able to do afterwards. So Mottel was talking about, I'm very happy to see new churches, But there are churches that I know that are new, but I would not be very happy with their beginning. The reason being is that they come out of the result of a church split.
Oh, yes.
Where someone takes members and rebels against the authority and then says, well, God called me, I have the vision, and I'm going to go begin a new church. So they take members from that church to begin a new church. And anytime that you begin wrong, you're probably not going to end up right.
That's right. That's right.
So that's what I would say. The foundation has got to be laid down right and correctly. In the way that we began was very good, because the gentleman that brought me to the area to minister, we had an agreement that we would follow God's leading. In the case when I came, his family was American, Anglo. He had some Hispanic people. They preferred English. They spoke English. So when I started ministry, I ministered it in English because that was their preferred language. But since the church was founded in the barrio in Odessa, in the Hispanic part, well, as I started visiting, obviously Spanish speaking people started coming.
Yeah.
And so he had the maturity to be able to understand that this was going to happen, is leading a certain way. And so he stayed with me for a little while, and then he went and began a home study with his family, and then began but it was done in agreement. It was done in fellowship with maturity according to what we had established at the beginning. And so I'm very grateful for him, for his maturity, for his willingness to see this need to happen. And so we followed through. So again, we had a very good foundation.
So a church starting because of a split, a group of people or one guy gets upset with the leadership at his current church, or doesn't like the way they shampoo the carpets or whatever. So he goes off and says, I can do it better, I can do it right, and I'd rather split the church and take everybody with me. Obviously, the person's heart's in the wrong place. But are there any good reasons to do that?
Oh, yes. A good reasons to do that is when you grow to a place where, I used the metaphor in another episode about a fishbowl, where we're looking at the church, kind of a fishbowl, and it comes to the place where the fishbowl is too small. And so when you come to a place where the fishbowl is too small, you need to go to another place. The only thing is that when you go to the other place, it's not going to come as a dividing the church, murmuring against the pastor, speaking evil about the pastor. Is going to come as a result of understanding that I need to grow. I need to go somewhere. And for that happened immediately before I came to this church. I ministered with my uncle for a time in Mexico. And so when this invitation came and the time came, then there was, some issues with our feelings that we had to work through. And so I went and sat down with him, and with tears in my eyes, and I began to tell him very clearly that we had enjoyed the time we were with him, and I had appreciated very much that he had opened that door to us, but that this was not a response of anything else, but that I needed to grow. That I had done what I was able to do under that leadership at that time, and in order for me to grow, I need to come out of that covering in order to be able to grow to what God had called me to grow to. And so he was able to understand as we sat down, and I dealt with him, obviously, with a lot of respect. He was the one that brought my family to Christ. He's the one that brought us from Mexico to the United States. He was one of the ones that came. So again, we were able to work it out that way, where I let him know it's nothing else, that I need to grow, so I need to go. And so we went in that way. So
It would be ideal, wouldn't it, if when a church reaches that point, people gather around, they raise money, they pray, and they launch you off with a fanfare.
Exactly.
Even send a group of people with you to seed the church. That would be ideal.
Exactly.
How about this, Mottel? It's not a matter of we don't like the color of the carpet or the way you shampoo it. It's not that I don't like the leadership or I'm wanting to start a fight, but the church has slipped into some sort of doctrinal error, or the pastor is misbehaving with the secretary, or some major issue. Is there a legitimate reason to split a church and to start a new one?
I think you mentioned two very different things that I have two very different reactions to.
Okay.
If there is immorality in the church, no, that's no reason to split the church. That's reason to clean out the schmutz, as we say in Yiddish. You've got to clean out the garbage.
What's Spanish for schmutz?
Schmutze.
That's, I mean, the First Corinthians deals with a situation of serious sin
But I
in
think
the church.
what happens, at least this is what I've heard, I don't know,
Okay.
because I've been with my congregation for so long, you know.
It's
We talked to the pastor. He's not listening. We've talked to the elders, and some of them agree, some of them don't. It's that kind of situation. It's
Well,
not clear, you know.
Then let me use this as a blatant pitch for the wisdom and the benefit of having a fraternal relationship with other churches. I am fully on board with the New Testament principle of the autonomy of the local church, that each local church is going to be independent. You can be independent while at the same time having a voluntary fraternal relationship with other churches. That is beneficial in the case that there is a suspected immoral relationship in leadership. The pastor may be so powerful
Right.
that
That was my
individuals
concern.
may not feel as though they can confront him. But when he has other pastors come alongside and show up at his office and they say, we got to talk because this is a situation that cannot go on, he knows that either he has to fess up, he has to get with them and get right and let them guide him through that. And I've seen that work in certain instances because the congregations that I've often been involved in are members of such a fraternal association. They've actually had to take this action when there was suspected immorality in leadership. Other pastors came along and they said, here's what's going to happen. And unless you think you can pull this church to you, which they couldn't. And there is the reason for having strong biblical elders, so that if you have a lead elder, a lead pastor, who it is suspected is in wrong relationship with someone there at the congregation, that you have strong enough elders who can lovingly confront him. That's why the scripture says, if you see a brother caught in sin and trespasses, then go to him. Take the elders and go to him. And so that process needs to go forward. Now, to your question about the occasion for splitting a church, if there is a doctrinal issue, each side thinks they're right. And sometimes, what is the actual truth of the matter? Each side may be a little right, each side may be a little wrong, because oftentimes some of it is cultural preferences. Sometimes people say it's a doctrinal issue, where oftentimes it's how we emotionally respond to certain doctrines. Particularly this is in the area of some of the questions revolving around Pentecostal or charismatic practice. Some people have a doctrine, other people have a preference. On this side of heaven, we do not know all things. None of us have doctrine that's perfectly, every I is dotted and every T is crossed exactly. I'm a stickler for the scriptures. I'm a conservative evangelical. I say that without apology. But I'm not foolish enough to imagine that I'm the source of all truth. God can reveal truth to other men. In that instance, it is better to take the congregation and go separate ways, hopefully with a mutual blessing, saying one group prefers to do service this way, another group prefers it this way and thinks that's the only scriptural way to do it. But if Messiah Yeshua is Lord of all, can't we then say, God bless you, brother. I wish you all the best. May God lead you and guide you as we now take this work forward in two separate groups.
I would think that if you're part of a congregation, let's say I'm part of Humberto's congregation, and all of a sudden Humberto, he stops doing the kind of Spanish songs he does, and he starts doing old school Spanish songs, you know, and he starts bringing in mariachis, and everything's totally different than it used to be. I would think it would be totally and completely wrong to start talking with other people and considering leaving. I would go to Humberto and say, you know what, brother? I just can't, I'm not into that kind of music. It's not bad, it's not evil, it's not wrong. It's just, I find myself every Sunday staring at the wall. It's not good. Is it okay with you if I move on to, First Iglesia down in Odessa, And whatever Humberto says, yes or no, I don't think it's ever right to get together with a group of people to do it. That's my take on it. Just, hey, if you can't fit there anymore, lovingly and quietly slip out. But to get a bunch of people around to start griping and moaning and seeing who else is on my side, let's go to Humberto as a group of 10 people and tell him he has to have the music change. No.
Here's what often happens. The person who becomes the group leader of this dissension group, of the group that is in dissension, there's oftentimes a history of dissension that person has had.
Yeah.
Very rarely is that the first time that they have found fault.
Yeah.
Typically, they have been people who've here, there, and another place, they've always found fault.
Yeah.
And they tend to be the church hoppers. They tend to be the folks who always find fault. And, so there's a pattern there. That's a pattern of a lack of submission to elders.
Yeah.
It's a lack of recognizing the good that God has in a congregation. And very sadly, there are some areas in our country where this is almost like sport.
Yeah.
It becomes almost a competitive sport, and how sad that is.
We have talked in previous episodes about supporting the leadership, particularly the lead pastor. There's a passage of Scripture that says there's 7 things that God hates. And one of them, it says, is God hates the person who sows discord amongst the brethren.
Yeah.
Extremely powerful statement, because it doesn't say that God hates discord. It says God hates the one who sows discord.
Yeah.
It's an extremely horrible thing. We talked about elders having the strength and the necessity of lovingly challenging the senior pastor if there's a suspected moral failure. Just as importantly, in fact, more importantly, because it's more often,
Yes.
it's important that these elders stand by their pastor and support him during difficult situations like that one.
Sure.
If a group of people rise up to challenge the senior pastor over something petty like music and they're sowing discord, these elders should be his hitmen. They should be willingly, we've got your back, Humberto.
Yeah.
You guys, the way you're handling this is all wrong, and the senior pastor shouldn't have to go to war. He should have guys going to war for him.
And it's part of the teaching that we need to do, as we're preparing these elders that are going to be alongside of us. And that's one thing that I always tell them. I always tell them when people are like this that bring discord, they're going to look for a leader to be their champion.
Yeah.
They're going to say, you go and face the giant, the pastor. And they're going to try to tell you how you're so honest and how you're so faithful to the doctrine and how you understand and how hard he is and how hard-headed he is and nobody can talk. He just doesn't understand, but you do. And I said, te están lavando el coco. They're just trying to wash your brains. I said, don't fall for that. You never want to be a champion to these type of people. And so I tell them very clearly they need to be careful about that. Don't allow anybody to do that for them because they know who I am already. And my door is always open to whoever wants to speak. They can come whenever they want.
Was it Absalom who won the heart of the children of Israel away from David?
Yeah.
He started meeting with people and buttering them up and offering them things, saying, if I were king, if I were Pastor Humberto, I'd be much more available. And if I were Pastor Humberto, hey, if you want different music, I'd give it to you.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what they do. We had a group leave our congregation several years back now, and then their group split, and then their group split. I think they had 3 splits after they left our congregation because it was like you said. They have a history, and that's just the kind of people they are. But it doesn't matter because they cause mischief anyway. Even what right or wrong doesn't matter when they're causing pain.
There are certain folk who believe that as soon as they see something that they believe is wrong, it has to become a major issue. They don't have the seichel, they don't have the the Hebrew word for wisdom, to recognize we have to have a different response to something that's a major moral issue in the congregation versus a small issue of cultural preference. Because they are unregulated in their personal lives themselves.
What a nice statement.
Wow. They become like they use a sledgehammer to smash a fly, and in the process break everything apart. Yeah. And I've seen that in the congregations, in the Messianic congregation that I was involved in, where just a very obnoxious sort of dissension was raised over a relatively minor paper issue that could have been cleared up. But instead, a threat was made against the congregation. A sledgehammer was used to threaten the congregation by several members when simply coming to the elders and saying, we're concerned about this issue about paperwork.
That old saying, making a mountain out of a molehill.
That's it.
I like how you said they were unregulated in their own character and passions, I throw in the word. Can either of you give me like a guideline or a principle for our audience as what's major, what's minor? How do we know? You know, where can we draw a line somewhere to help us understand?
Well, major things I think have to do with salvation and eternal life. You know, when there are major issues that we're talking about somebody going to heaven or to hell, you know, something very important.
So in this instance, he said it was a paper issue. Yep. The first question you ask, okay, it's a paper issue. Is anybody going to hell over it? No, seriously. Is anybody saved over it? Yeah. Then cool your jets. Let's talk this through. Let's be patient. Agreed?
Exactly.
Okay. Are there any others? Any other lines you would throw in there? Guidelines?
You know, I think that we need to be honest with ourselves and recognize our own passions and our own personalities. There is well known that there are men who go through their lives being bulls in the china shop, and wherever they settle, whatever congregation or church they involve themselves in, they invariably wind up in conflict with the elders or pastor. At a certain point, that person needs to have a reality check. And there needs to be some strong folks who are going to say, eventually, don't you realize it's you? You're always the one who seems to be having the problem. Yeah. And otherwise, that person will create a trail of bodies wherever they go.
One thing that I've always said, the problem that we have, we see it in marriage and also in these relationships, is that a lot of times we want to qualify things as right or wrong.
That's right.
But it's not so much as right and wrong as it is just different.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of times when we have problems in between the husband and the wife, you know, she says, well, he's not right. He said, well, it's not about right or wrong. He said, we're different. A woman sees things one way, man sees things another way. So it's not about right or wrong. It's about different. And in the church, it's the same thing. We are just different. We see things differently. And so we need to have the maturity to understand it's not that I'm right or he's wrong or anything. It's just that we're different. It's just two different ways of doing the same thing.
Would you think it's fair to say if there's a difference, and it's not a matter of salvation, it's not a matter of heaven or hell, and you're agitated about it and you want to fight about it, almost you're wrong. You're in the wrong. If you're that uptight, it's probably you.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly. I mean, that's the thing. Are you demonstrating the fruit of the Spirit?
Exactly, yeah.
And if the fruit of the Spirit is not being demonstrated on you, then what is it that is leading you and guiding you? If it's not the fruit of the Spirit, what is it that is leading and guiding you?
Because it's more important to be righteous than it is to be right.
There you go.
And humility is much more important than winning. Better to take 20 on the chin than to give one.
Yeah, and
you know?
We just went through a situation where it was clear to a number of us that in order, even though we felt we were right, and others did as well, to try to push that point would have caused irreparable damage. And so we simply swallowed our losses and said, well, we're going to separate and go a different way to try to minimize the damage to the other believers.
So you left not to cause discord, but to keep further discord from happening.
Right.
To get out of the way.
We put our own preferences aside and said, well, the Lord has used me here as long as he's going to, and I'm not going to try to force my opinion. The Lord is going to straighten it out one day.
Yeah.
I can't force it to be straightened out right now with the current personnel, the current situation, but the Lord's going to take care of it eventually.
Church is open, church is closed. One thing is for sure, open or closed, we struggle.
Yeah.
And if we would treat one another with love, respect, as you said, with the fruit of the Spirit, gentleness, humility, everything else can be forgiven.
Yes.
That's right.
Grace is the one factor that we can't do without.
Amen.
You don't always win by winning. Sometimes you win by losing.
Yeah.
And we need to learn how to lose.
Those are some good closing words. Thank you for joining us on The Shepherd's Heart. God bless you. We'll see you next time.
This program was produced by and for God's Learning Channel. If you enjoyed this program, we need your support to help keep this program on GLC. Please make your checks out to God's Learning Channel, P.O. Box 61000, Midland, Texas 79711-1000. Please be sure to designate where your contribution is intended. It is very important to let GLC know which programs you enjoy and support.
Order your copy of this program from the GLC bookstore by calling the numbers or visiting the website on your screen. Please include the program number when ordering.